Well, I knew Charlie pretty well. I'd gone out and spoken with him and his group, and the weird thing, I had just been on his show about a few days ago, and then after the show was over, we had a nice talk. I think he was very misunderstood. He was a very kind person that reached out to people. He never lost his temper. He just did one with Gavin Newsom, and he was trying to talk about issues that other conservatives were not talking about, like marriage for young people, fertility, and then his efforts to get out the vote and register vote. It was a political assassination, because when you think of people under the age of 35 on the conservative side who combined photogenic ability to speak to people without notes, to do a podcast, to have the administrative skill to create from scratch a huge organization, to be political savvy and to know which states to go in and how to approach the electorate to help the conservatives. And you put all that together, he is irreplaceable. He really is. I can't think of anybody who could do that. And that's what's really stunning. And the other thing very quickly is we don't really in this country do what they do in Europe, or maybe we've had Solomon Rushdie, a public intellectual. We had some, I think in 2019 there was a news organization where a guy went after them. But usually we don't see attacks on reporters or journalists or podcasters. And this is new. And if this person turns out to be on the left, I have no idea, then it's not just a political act, but it's also trying to thwart the dissemination of knowledge. The other thing, very quickly, we saw that with the two Trump would-be assassins, that they were mentally ill and disturbed, yes. And we've seen that now with the creepy predator murder executioner of that beautiful girl we talked about from the Ukraine. And he was mentally ill. But the reaction to it is always, the reaction is like we saw from the mayor of Charlotte. Let's not demonize the homeless. Let's not blame anybody. Let's not do this. This guy was crazy. That I don't really care anymore. You know that? I don't care. It doesn't make any difference to Charlie's family, his daughters, to grow up without a father. It doesn't matter whether he was killed by somebody who was a hired political assassin or whether the person had mental problem. It doesn't really matter. When I walk on the street in San Francisco and somebody is defecating and comes up and tries to push me, I don't really care whether he's crazy or he's sane. It just is a fact that happens. And to the Irania, the Ukrainian girl who was murdered, it doesn't really matter whether the guy thought he was talking in his head. The way he did that, he knew what he was doing.
Yeah.
And so I think everybody's tired of that. The third thing is there's violence on both sides, and I understand that the Minnesota judge who was a person who went after the activist in Minnesota was probably, I don't know what he was, center-right or something. But when you look at the Scalise assassinations and you look at I think his name was Brian Thompson, the United Health executive, you look at the two attempts on Trump's life, you get and then you collate that in a wider atmosphere of just things like the New Republic putting Trump with the mustache, or a poll taken after the second assassination attempt that says 30% of the Democratic Party thought they would have liked Trump to be killed. Or you look at what comes on MSNBC, that Matthew Dowd, who's really become a creepy guy, basically going right in there and saying he deserved it. And you look at Hakeem Jeffries doing a video with a baseball bat. Or you look at House members kickboxing and punching. Or you look at the head of the DNC, we're not going to bring pencils anymore, you know what I mean? So the left always says that we're more sophisticated, we're more moral than you, so we're going to use tough language. Get Jasmine Crockett and this utter vile racism about white people, and then you see Joy Reid basically just horrific things she said on MSNBC. You see Sonny Huston on The View saying, well, it's uneducated white women that white. And you get all of this, and you get the impression that they are lowering the bar of what's acceptable. it's acceptable. Because if you really believe that Charlie Kirk is a white privilege, white rage, or Donald Trump is, and you need to have videos about kickboxing him and punching him and hitting him with a bat, it all filters down. And there's people out there that interpret that as, I'm talking about something different. When you tell people and you basically encourage them to use violence, and we're going to take Trump out, and you shake a cane at people on the floor of the House like Al Green, or as I said about Hakeem Jeffries, you show up with a baseball bat,
right.
Or Spartacus saying that he would like to hit Trump as he did once, said that. If I was Donald Trump, and I pray for his safety, I think they should triple down on his Secret Service, because most people would think, well, this is so horrific, we don't want to ever see this again. But the left-wing mind of certain people on the left is, well, if this guy did it, then I can do better than that. That's how it works. We saw that with the second assassin. He was encouraged by the near miss of the first assassin. He talks about things that most people don't talk about. For example, he says, we have a crisis in this country that we're not having children. We have a 1.6. I was talking to him about that just a few days ago. And he says, don't worry, we're trying to encourage that it's neat, it's cool to have children, to have a nuclear family. And we said, actually, conservative men are ahead of women. They are desperately looking for women that want to partner up and have a nuclear family and prosper in the style of their grandparents. And that would bring a stabilizing return to the society at large. So I don't hear people usually talking about demography. And he talked about social, cultural trends, norms, changes, that he was way ahead of his leftist counterparts. Yeah. And the idea that he really changed the dynamic of young people on campus not being afraid to come out and say they're conservative or they're traditionalist or they want to get married or they want to have kids. And that was just contrary to what they hear every day from fellow students and faculty. As soon as I heard the news, I said, something happens to Charlie Kirk. Is there any person under the age of 35 who has administrative skills to make a huge $100 million up organization? No. Is there anybody who can do that in addition to a daily podcast? No. Is there anybody who has enough energy to fly all over the United States? No. Is there anybody who's not worried about being injured or attacked, or he's fearless? No. Is there anyone who can speak, extemporary without notes like that? No. So he combined a lot. And then the other secret to his success was he was not a product of the university. He didn't go to college, graduate. Right. So he had a natural affinity for working people, and he was had street smarts, and it was a different approach, and it appealed to a far greater percentage of young people than other people do. This country has got some deep problems, and these people who think that they can just, we're going to do this, I don't think they understand.
They don't.
That it has consequences or maybe they do, that they want people to come out of the woodwork and do these things. But, boy, I don't want to be partisan, but when you look at the Scalise shootings and the 2 attempts on Donald Trump and Luigi Mangione, you get the idea that the left feels that they're so morally superior and intellectually superior that almost any means necessary, and especially the reaction to these things. When Trump was almost killed, you looked at the social media, and when the Luigi Mangione was canonized after he killed a man who had worked his way up from the middle class to be a CEO. So I think it doesn't do any good to just say this is violence and we've got to just stop the violence. This is coming from one particular side who's justified it because they think that Trump and his supporters represent an existential evil. Then they feel that they're going to be heroic. I think we saw that with the second assassination attempt on Trump. The other thing is it marks we crossed the Rubicon, because it was sort of known that journalists or people who were in opinion journalism on both sides were exempt. And we didn't, I know all of us, you probably more than I, but if you go to an airport, 1 out of 20 people wants to confront you. But there wasn't anybody really it's not common in the United States to go after journalists. That's what Charlie was. He wasn't just an activist, he was a journalist. And he wrote, and he was very good at it. But the idea that now you go after the people who deliver information, that's kind of a new thing that they have. And I just know in the last 3 months, I live out in kind of a rural area. I've been swatted where sheriffs that armed said there was an intruder. There wasn't. They came armed to my door. I've had $90,000 drained out of all my bank accounts by hackers. And I think we're reaching a level now with the vituperation. And that we saw that with the shooting on the rail, the killing of our young immigrant. Yes. And when you start to collate all the things that people have said, white, whether it's on The View or Joy Reid or all of those crazy people, that language of deprecation and vituperation, it filters down. And they're the ones that have always told us that words matter. It's everywhere. Believe it or not, I'm reviewing right now a book on classics, and the professor who's on the left has used the word whiteness and white in a book not concerned with race 258 times in a 148-page book, I count them, all about anger and hatred. And until we say to people, we don't really care what ethnic group or racial group or political group, but there is a zero tolerance for that type of unadulterated hatred. And I just remember after the campaign, after the election, Sonny Hostin got on The View, and the first thing she said is she blamed uneducated white women. I remember that. White women. Nobody should collectivize. So I think part of it is we're collectivizing people and we're putting them in this demonic category, and we've just lowered the bar so much it's inevitable that people are going to come out of the woodwork and consider that the violence they use against people on the right, or right, whether they're officials or now journalists apparently, is going not only to be exempt, but it's going to be canonized, and they're going to be heroic. And I think I don't want to make any macabre predictions, but I bet you, and I haven't looked at the news, there will be people immediately that will cheer this on social media. It's going to become, the two sources of reaction will be obviously from political officials and from the media. And the media knows that you don't want to have a counter reaction, so I would expect all of the officials, left and right, and all of the major journalists left and right will condemn this, if not for the right reason of morality, then for their own self-interest, because you don't want to get into a spiral. But I have been listening to stuff that's been said on podcasts, on major TV shows, that I cannot believe. It's just pure racial hatred, ethnic hatred, and the targets more than ever are the so-called bogeyman of the white male MAGA. That's got to stop. When you have that vocabulary of disparagement from Joe Biden, that they were garbage, that they were chumps, that were dregs, and from Hillary, deplorable or irredeemable, Klinger, it's just too much finally. And it's all been predicated on the idea, well, this is a privileged group and they have a special category, you can say whatever you want. Conservatives, all that's over with. I mean, this is the first time in my memory that a major journalistic figure has been targeted for assassination that I can think of. And let's hope it doesn't start something. But this is really new. This happens in South America. It happens in Mexico. It even happens as we saw with Salman Rushdie and in Europe. But it has not happened here yet. And I'm afraid that this is something the left, in their desperation, if this person turns out to be that way, has embarked on. I think that Democrats in government, in the media, in foundations, in universities, who are highly influential, hate capitalism. And If you look at the last 50 years, there's been as many Democratic presidents and Congresses as Republicans. And so their primary mission is to socialize medicine and make it inefficient. And I can testify the last 2 weeks it's inefficient. And to zone and regulate the ability to buy a house. It makes it almost impossible to do it in a state like New York or Massachusetts, but especially California. I talked to a builder not long ago, and he says he has to film every house he builds. It's very expensive because he's afraid that something will go wrong, and then he will be accused of shorting the blueprint, and then he can show that he didn't, because there's a whole team of regulators and lawyers ready to sue developers. And then in addition to that, we saw what Biden did with immigration. So what I'm getting at is when the left is driving the capitalist car, they try to wreck it and overregulate it and institutionalize it and absorb it. And then the result in these blue states that are not working, like California, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Michigan, is you can't buy a house. They're crime-ridden. You can't really afford gas or power. All overregulated, wind and solar, da-da-da-da. No pipelines in New York. New York's got a lot of natural gas, leave it alone. So then the young people come up and they see this baby boomer Karen generation that came up under different auspices, and they have their 401ks and their pensions and their retirements. And they say, well, that guy's got a nice brownstone up 94th Street. Wow, that person's got a home in the Hamptons. I don't have anything, but I have a Williams degree. Well, I graduated from Swarthmore, and I'm a Vogue assistant editor, and this isn't fair. And I work as in a financial firm, as a talent scout, and I make $100,000 a year, and I can't even afford. And so they become socialist, and they say, this isn't fair. This isn't fair. It's not because they don't like capitalism. It's because they want what they think they should get, and that's understandable, but they're really angry at socialism, and nobody explains that to them. They're angry that socialism has destroyed capitalism in California and all the major blue states and made housing and the essentials of life unaffordable. So then a Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, or Mondami, Tim Walz demagogue comes in and said, the capitalists did it. No, you did it. You did it. And so the public doesn't even know it, but false consciousness, maybe, if I could use Marxist terms. They don't know it, but they're really railing about the constraints on the private sector to serve the public. But they see it the other way. They say these insects and capitalists are preying on us. And that's what we've got. There's a big class thing among the left because the architects of the New Green Deal at the highest levels and DEI are very wealthy people. And they want to make heaven on earth, and they do not care about the effects on their own people, their own leftist comrades. And they say, you can't get what I have because you don't have socialism. It's like they went up to the attic, they closed the attic door, they kicked away the ladder and said, you can't get in because you don't have socialism, even though we're up here because of capitalism, which we destroyed. Yep. And we didn't want you to come in here because it's too crowded. It's like Elizabeth Warren. I did read her book, by the way, on how to flip a house and make a quick profit. That was before she became the first Native American law professor that Harvard bragged about. Once you have a DEI regimen and you say you're going to take particular groups and label them oppressed or victimized, and then they're going to be exempt from accountability, then they're going to react to that exemption. It's like Hunter Biden in the individual case. If you tell Hunter Biden that no one's going to arrest him, then he's going to do more of it. He's going to do more of it. And because he knows he's exempt. And when I say DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, I'm not just saying that's the only exemption. Very wealthy, privileged people like the Bidens had a veritable DEI exemption. You can't touch us. You can't question us. Joe Biden, you can't question me. And, You know, that's why he did one thing. He did not use that auto pen. He knew that the people were doing it with the auto pen for his benefit. They were swarming the system to clog up as many pardons as they could, so his individual pardons, they could just say, well, it wasn't the Biden family. He just pardoned anybody. Might have been a little overdid it, might have mussed up some people's hair, but, you know. But he signed those personally, and he did it because he knew what they had done. And he knew that they got away with it because of their political privilege and their money and their contacts and all of that. But whenever you do that in a society, then you're going to get more of it. More. It's not good for human nature to tell somebody that whatever you do, we're going to find an excuse to exempt you from consequences or rationalize your antisocial or criminal behavior. That gets to this weird, and I mentioned it before, we have this very strange tick in America that if you set foot in the United States with no knowledge of our customs, traditions, lifestyles, but if you set foot in the United States and you are non-white, you are eligible under DEI auspices for preferential treatment or exemptions on the basis that you've suffered historic prejudice, even though you've never have. And so that came when I was a professor at California State University, well before Trump has readdressed this issue, which is, I think it's a federal law, but it was ignored by a lot of states, that you cannot give in-state tuition discounts for illegal aliens who are residing in your state illegally while you are charging them 1/3 of the cost of a college education than you are charging U.S. citizens just a few miles across your state border. And I saw it all the time. I could not believe it. I'd get all these students, they'd come up to me and they'd say, you know, it's $800 for tuition for the year, but I got to pay $2,400. I can't afford it. And you got all these students that tell me that they're here illegally and they're only paying $800. And I mentioned it in Mexifornia. I got really blasted by it. I'm trying to remember, the famous conservative got really angry. He reviewed that book. You know, the Broken Windows guy, the co-author, James Q. Wilson. He wrote a devastating review of Mexifornia and commentary. And he said I was parochial, I was a restrictionist, and illegal immigration was basically really good. He was a libertarian. And I saw him, I felt bad because I saw him later and he had lymphoma. And I walked up to him and he turned away. I said, you know, I'm not mad that you did that. I don't think you're right, but I don't hold a grudge. And then he was very friendly. And then I saw him once at Pepperdine when I was a visitor years ago, and he was very friendly to me. But that just shows you that when I wrote that book in 2002 and 3, it was, gosh, people got angry about that because I said that this is not sustainable, illegal immigration.